hour.
This is a lot of fun. This is the second to last day I get to be on the road with Harry Browne. As some of you know, I'm the projects manager with Harry Browne for president, but I'm also the CEO of the Carla Howell U.S. Senate campaign against the Darth Vader of big government, Ted Kennedy himself. So if you have friends up in Massachusetts who believe small government is beautiful, ask them to vote once or twice or 3 times for Carla Howell for U.S. Senate. Now, but I come here tonight to talk about Harry Browne, and I come here to talk about libertarians and the Libertarian Party. I remember 25 years ago when I went to my first Libertarian meeting, and I know we had a lot of people standing up. It was their first event. When I went to my first Libertarian meeting, I swear to you the conversation sounded something like this. There were 5 people in the room. I was number 6. I knew I was the only new one because they all turned and looked at me. The way carnivores look at one poor little sheep. And the discussion was, and this sounds sort of like it, the epistemological underpinnings of the metaphysical basis of the praxeological understandings of neo-Austrian economics of an objective government. Wow. I thought Mensa had merged. Wow. This is just amazing stuff. I didn't have a clue what was going on, but I thought I had found my way home. And sure enough, I had. Well, the good news is we have since adopted the King's English, and we've deposed the King. So we've learned how to talk good English. So welcome if this is your first Libertarian gathering. For those of you who are new, you might hear still one big long word, and that's the word libertarian. Well, as you know, the word libertarian comes from the root word liberty, individual liberty, and full personal responsibility, and very, 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 very small government. How small? We want government so small, they start putting its picture on the back of milk cartons. Small government. Now, libertarians agree with the founding fathers, the people that founded this country, that we want a night watchman government with a skeleton crew doing only what is authorized in the Constitution of the United States of America. Small government. I know what some of you are thinking. I took the Harry Loreen mind reading course, so I know what you're thinking. Yeah, but am I really a libertarian? Okay, 3 very simple tests. When George W. Bush and Al Gore come on TV to explain their position, do you talk back? You might be a libertarian. When somebody sends you the most dumb thing you've ever read on your email that begins with the phrase, there ought to be a law, do you type back at the top of your lungs? You might be a libertarian. You have a cat? Your cat's a libertarian. And you might be too. You know, when people come to America and they want to become American citizens, they take very seriously our Declaration of Independence, our Constitution. They read it, they understand it, and they agree with it. When they hold up their hand and swear to faithfully defend that Constitution, they mean it, unlike Democrats and Republicans running for public office. These people are very serious about the Constitution. They know what it took to become an American rather than being simply born one. We're very fortunate to have been born in this wonderful country. Well, as some of you know, I am empowered to swear you in as duly authorized members of the Libertarian Party. This comes under the rule of fun. Please raise your right hand. Trust me, I will not embarrass you. I may embarrass me, but I will not embarrass you. And repeat after me. I, your name, good, you got it immediately. Am an individual. I, your name, am unique. I, your name, promise never to repeat what other people tell me. You're in. Thank you for being here. We are very fortunate. Our speaker tonight is somebody who's been a hero of mine for many, many years. In 1970, Harry Browne came out with a book called How You Can Profit from the Coming Devaluation. In that book, Mr. Browne argued the federal government was going to devalue the dollar. The gold and silver prices would rise. But he was a young writer. He didn't have PhD next to his name. And so the newspaper columnists that noticed the book mocked it. Why, if you can't trust Richard Nixon with money. But sure enough, people like you and me started passing the book along to our friends and said, this makes sense. This makes sense. And the book, by word of mouth, became a bestseller. And sure enough, the federal government did devalue the dollar. Gold and silver prices rose, and people who followed his investment advice got rich. I was not among them. I'm staying until I get a second tip. I want to be rich too. Good news is Mr. Browne has written a total of 12 books. 3 were bestsellers. You might have read some of them. You Can Profit from a Monetary Crisis. A personal favorite of mine, How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World. If you haven't read that book, you're in for a treat about how to take back your life. Mr. Browne has written in economics, personal finance, personal growth, and later in politics. In 1995, Harry Browne came out with a book called Why Government Doesn't Work. Please applaud if you've read that book. In 1996, the Libertarian Party nominated Harry Browne to be our standard bearer. Let me take you back just 4 years. At that time, the Libertarian Party was about 1/3 the size it is today. And in spite of being much, much smaller, all of us worked very, very diligently, and Harry Browne received about 500,000 votes. Since then, libertarian growth has absolutely mushroomed through the efforts of people in this room, through our national party, through libertarians coast to coast. And because of it, today we're a much bigger party, and we're in for a surprise. I could tell you a lot of things about Harry Browne, but I want to tell you one thing before I bring him on. Today we saw the Rasmussen poll. In spite of the fact that Patrick J. Buchanan has received 60 times, by count, 60 times the coverage of Harry Browne is neck and neck with Pat Buchanan right now, hovering right about 1%. And he's only 2 points behind Ralph Nader. So we may be in for an election night surprise, and I hope that you're going to be there and vote for Harry Browne. Ladies and gentlemen, this year Mr. Browne came out with a book called The Great Libertarian Offer. In early July, the Libertarian Party nominated this man to be our standard bearer a second time. Please join me and welcome the man who should be president, Harry Browne.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, thank you so much. What a wonderful welcome. And what a pleasure it is to be here in Portland. And how flattered I am that you gave up an evening to come out here tonight, especially since MSNBC is rerunning the last presidential debate tonight. And you could have been home watching that. Not only that, TNT is rerunning the World Wrestling Federation matches from the Reform Party convention. So I'm honored that you would give up all of that for me tonight. We're going to have a question period a little bit later, at which time I hope I answer any questions or concerns that you might have of any kind. But because there are certain questions that are asked so often, I thought I might anticipate those, just go over those in the body of my talk. So the first question, which comes up often, and I'll start with that, is why are you running for president? Well, I believe that I'm running for president for the same reason that you gave up an evening this evening to come here. I'm running for president because I want to be free to live my life as I want to live it, not as Al Gore or George Bush thinks is best for me. I want to run my life. I don't want Al Gore, George Bush, Ralph Nader, or Pat Buchanan running my life for me. I'm a grown individual. I can take care of myself. And I want you to be free also. I want you to be free to keep every dollar you earn. Spend it, save it, give it away as you think best, not as the politicians will allow after they're done with what they want. I want you to be able to raise your children by your values, not the values of bureaucrats who think that they know best how to create a brave new world. And I want you to be able to take care of yourself. I want you to be able to make your own decisions. I want you to live your life as you want to live it, not as the politicians dictate. And we libertarians, in short, want to get government out of your life. We want the government in Washington to be limited to just those functions in the Constitution, and the rest of it should be up to us to take care of ourselves. Now, this translates into specific stands on specific issues, and there are issues that are important to us and many other issues besides, but you know always that we will come down on the side of getting government out of the situation rather than proposing some new government program to solve a problem that government itself probably created. And so what we will do is to say that if government has messed up health care, let's get government out of health care. Let's not promote some new program to try to paper over all the problems that the government has created. But there are specific issues that are especially important to libertarians. And I'd like to run through 3 or 4 of them very quickly. One of them, of course, is the income tax. We want to repeal the income tax entirely, not rearrange the cost of big government. George Bush and Al Gore each have their plans to give you a tax cut. But because they do not plan to reduce the size of government in any way whatsoever, in fact, they plan to increase the size of government, all they're doing with their tax cuts is to rearrange the cost of big government. I mean, the government costs $1.8 trillion. Who's going to pay for that? The Russians? Obviously not. The Martians? Obviously not. We're going to pay for it. So whatever they do to the tax code is just rearranging the burden of big government. We want to make government so small that we don't need an income tax at all, so that you can be free to keep every dollar you earn. And I think that there are really 5 benefits that I can think of offhand that will come from repealing the income tax. First of all, you will, of course, no longer have to pay that enormous burden to Washington. And if you're a typical middle-class family, we're talking about $10,000 a year or more. $10,000. What would you do with that money if you no longer had to send it to Washington? Would you put your children in a private school or religious school or homeschool them so that you can have exactly the kind of education you want for your children without having to beg the state for a voucher, without having to plead with the Board of Education to please teach my children what I think they ought to learn? Would you start your own business? Would you support your church or your favorite cause or charity in a way you've never been able to do before? What would you do with that money? It's your money, you earned it. It's amazing to me that here you are, you get up every day and you go to work and you work 8 or 10 or 12 hours a day, and yet the politicians believe that they have first call on that money, that they should take what they want and let you have whatever is left over. You know, George Bush is the candidate of smaller government, he told us in one of the debates. And because he's the candidate of smaller government, he said that he believes that the government should never take more than 1/3 of your income. I can see you swooning already in ecstasy. But really, this is the way they think. This is their money, and they decide how much of it you should be allowed to keep. Well, I believe you should keep it all. You earned it, and you should decide how much you're going to send to Washington. And if you decide that you just can't afford to send any this week, well, that's your business. The second benefit is that everybody you deal with will get this enormous cut in taxes as well. If you are in business for yourself, all of your customers will get a similar increase in take-home pay and have more money to spend. If you work for somebody else, your employer's customers will have more money to spend with your employer, and your employer will have more money to distribute among the employees. The third benefit is that everybody in the country will have more money to work with because it will no longer be going to Washington to be squandered on so many worthless programs. And because everybody in the country will have more money to spend, we're talking about $1 trillion a year, which will be left in the hands of the people who actually earn the money rather than squandered by the politicians. $1 trillion a year. That's enough to buy a job for everybody who can work and charity for everybody who can't work. The fourth benefit is that your life will be your own at last. No longer can they pry into your bank account. No longer can they call you into an IRS office and make you justify everything you put on your 1040 form. No longer can they treat you as guilty until you prove your innocence. No longer will you have to justify every deduction and prove that every exemption is legitimate. No longer can they intimidate you. No longer can they pry into your life. No longer can they control your life. Your life will be your own. And the fifth benefit, which may be the most important of all, is that no longer will the politicians have the money to mess up our lives. For the first 120 years of America's existence, there was no income tax except for a couple of very brief periods. And because there was no income tax, the politicians did not have much money to work with. They raised all the money through tariffs and excise taxes, which are taxes on products levied at the manufacturing level. And because they were taxes on products, if the rates got too high, then the products became too expensive and people quit buying the products and the revenues would drop. And the result would be that the politicians didn't have as much money as they expected. So even though they stepped over the Constitution from time to time, and even though they tried to get into other areas that they were not authorized to do, they never could go very far because the revenue was limited. But in 1913, all of that changed. When the income tax amendment was passed, now the politicians had virtually unlimited revenue available to them to do whatever they wanted. Because you have to go to work. You have to earn an income. You have to feed your family. So no matter how high the rate gets, you still have to go to work. You still have to earn an income, and they can still tax that income. If 5% isn't enough, then they raise the tax to 10%. If they spend everything that they get at 15%, they raise it to 25%, or 35, or 40, or 50. During the Second World War, the income tax rate actually rose to 91%. 91%, and still people had to go to work and produce for their families. Of course, that was a temporary wartime tax, so they repealed it in the 1960s. But the point is, of course, that with this revenue, they can do anything they want, and they have completely obliterated the Constitution. There are no limits on government whatsoever. They have gotten into health care, education, foreign aid, corporate welfare, individual welfare, law enforcement, highway boondoggles, farm subsidies. There is nothing that a politician will not propose if he thinks that it will do some good for him politically. My heavens, they even regulate the size of your toilet. And you know, a few months ago, they came out with a new regulation that governs the size of holes in Swiss cheese. Now, doesn't that make you feel secure? So now the Swiss cheese has the same size holes in it that the safety net does. But all of these areas that they have gotten into, they have made a mess of. Education in this country was always a chancy proposition because it was run by local governments. But it really started going downhill in the 1960s when the federal government moved in. Healthcare. We had the best healthcare system in the history of the world. I'm old enough to remember what it was like as a young man in the 1950s and the early 60s. Health insurance was available to virtually everyone. Even if you had pre-existing conditions, you could still get health insurance. You might be exempted from those conditions for the first year or two, but you could still be covered for everything else and probably eventually even for the condition that you had before you got the health insurance. Doctors would know who you were. They didn't have to consult a file folder. They didn't have enormous staffs to handle all the paperwork. They knew who you were. They even made house calls if it were necessary. Hospitals. A hospital stay for a routine operation might cost 4 or 5 days' pay, not the several months' pay that it takes now. We had charity hospitals and free clinics in virtually every country, in virtually every city of the country. And now all of those hospitals, almost all of those hospitals and the clinics have been run out of business by government regulation. You know, that same government without whom the poor would be left helpless. Hospital stays now cost months of your pay. Doctors are so overburdened with paperwork from Medicare, Medicaid, health insurance companies having to adhere to mandates of the federal government that they have no time for you, and they have to have nurses interview you first, and they have these enormous staffs to take care of all this paperwork. And health insurance now has become so expensive because of all the mandates that the federal government and other state governments have loaded on the health insurance companies. You have to cover abortion, you have to cover mental illness, you have to cover drug abuse, you have to cover alcoholism, you have to cover all of these things, so that now health insurance is so expensive that 40 million Americans can't afford to have it. And of course, government is good at one thing. It knows how to break your legs and then hand you a crutch and say, see, if it weren't for the government, you couldn't walk. And so now that it has made such a mess of health care, they believe that only the politicians can fix it. How are they going to fix it? By getting the government out of health care? Of course not. By new government programs. Now they want to handle prescription drugs. After what they've done to Medicare, I can't imagine that they would have the nerve to do so. You know, today senior citizens pay more than twice as much out of their own pocket for health care as they did before Medicare began. Even after allowing for inflation, they have made life miserable for senior citizens. A senior citizen finds that 20% of the tests and treatments he needs is turned down by Medicare. And the law says he cannot pay the doctor directly for this when Medicare turns it down. It's against the law. The doctor could actually go to jail if he were to accept money from a Medicare patient. How are senior citizens better off? Now they want to extend this to prescription drug care. You can imagine the results will be that prescription drugs will become far more expensive for all of us, harder to get, and it will slow down the production of new drugs for Alzheimer's or cancer or other things that may be in the pipeline right now. The federal government has made a mess of everything that it has touched. It is not as though we gave up the Constitution for some benefit. We have not. It is not as though the money that you send to Washington with your income tax is producing some result. It is not. It is not as though the politicians have made America a better place with all these programs. They have not. And one of the greatest benefits of repealing the income tax is that they will no longer have the wherewithal to mess up our lives the way they've been doing for the last 40 or 50 years. Today, just as in the 19th century, tariffs and excise taxes are sufficient already. The taxes being collected today are sufficient to pay for national defense, the judiciary, the post office, the mint, the patent office, and the few other trivial functions the Constitution asks the federal government to do. It just is not enough to pay for all these programs that have messed up our lives. So, of course, the income tax is a very, very important issue to libertarians. But there are others. Social Security is one of them. You remember Social Security used to be the third rail of politics. It was amazing that it was such a sacrosanct program politically, because Social Security has always been probably the worst financial swindle that has ever been perpetrated on the American people. You pay into Social Security your entire working life. 15% of your income goes into Social Security, either directly from your paycheck or your employer paying it on your behalf. 15% of your income goes in week after week, month after month, year after year, and when you retire, it turns out that they have not put $1 aside to take care of your retirement. Not $1. They have spent every single dollar you put into it. They may have spent it on other people, they may have spent it on monuments to themselves, or they may have spent it propping up the Russian ruble for another hour. But whatever it is they did with it, they will never put it in an account with your name on it, safe and sound, waiting for you to retire to live off the interest from it. No, they have squandered every dollar of it. And when you retire, the only hope you have is that the politicians will tax your children and your grandchildren sufficiently to pay off the promises that the politicians have made to you. Well, finally, it has become so obvious that this system cannot continue as it is that now the Democrats and the Republicans have come up with wonderful ways of saving the system. The Democrats have a good one. Al Gore is going to be your investment advisor. The Republicans have another one whereby 2% of the 15% that you put into Social Security gets to go into, well, actually, I don't know what it goes into. George Bush said he wouldn't give us the details until after the election was over. And I think he has a pretty good reason for doing that way. But he says that somehow you will be able to have some control over it. Don't misunderstand this. You are not going to have the Social Security tax cut from 15 to 13%. You are not going to have the money yourself to invest, but they will allow you to specify that that money will be used for one of several options, perhaps, one of which I'm sure will be oil futures. But supposedly, this is a great revolutionary thing. All my Republican friends tell me, isn't this wonderful? Isn't this amazing? This is the road to privatizing Social Security. Well, you know, this is not a new plan. The Republicans first introduced it in 1998. And the day it was introduced, I happened to be in Los Angeles for a radio show. I was going to be on Michael Reagan's syndicated radio show, and I was sitting in the studio, and Reagan said to me, you know, they came out with this Social Security plan today, and I'm going to call Phil Gramm on the telephone and ask him to explain it to us, because Phil Gramm was the spokesman. So he did. He called him, and I'm sitting there in the studio with Reagan. And Phil Gramm goes on and on explaining this in the same succinct, articulate way that Al Gore explains it today. And finally, after about 10 minutes of explaining that it's going to start out where 2% you get to specify something on, and then after a while it gets to be 3% and 5%, and eventually you'll be completely free of Social Security. So I wrote a little note, and I slipped it across the table to Michael Reagan, and I said, ask him how long it will take before we're free of Social Security. So Reagan says, tell me, Phil, how long will it be before we're completely out of Social Security? And Gramm said, well, according to my best estimates, I think it will be about 60 years. So, if you believe in reincarnation, this plan is for you. But how dare these people decide that you have to be in this system? Oh, I know, they justify it by saying that there are some irresponsible people who will not plan for their retirement, and those people have to be forced into Social Security. But how is that a justification to force the responsible people into Social Security? If we want a responsible population in America, we are not going to get it by rewarding the irresponsible and punishing the responsible. And yet, that is the basis of so many government programs. Everything's based on a worst-case scenario. Because some people won't plan for their future, we all have to be roped into the swindle. Because some people will abuse drugs, the Bill of Rights must be torn up for everyone. Because some people will misuse a gun, no one should be allowed to defend himself against armed criminals. And it goes on and on and on, always taking the worst-case scenario as the justification to take honest, law-abiding, responsible people and ruin their lives. And it has got to stop. As Al Gore has pointed out, the only way George Bush can take and allow people to have 2% of their earnings, young people, the only way this can be done is to take the money away from what would go to the elderly. And he's saying that you can't give the money to two people at the same time. Well, this is a Ponzi scheme, pure and simple. So of course, if you let somebody out of it, not pay the taxes, then somebody else isn't going to get their benefits because they already spent the benefits for those people. There is a way out of it, however, and it is the only way I know of that we can end this thing once and for all right now. And that is to sell off the assets that the federal government shouldn't be owning in the first place. The 70% of the western lands, of the lands in the 13 western states. The hundreds of thousands of federal buildings that serve no constitutional purpose at all. The pipelines, the power companies, the unused military bases, the commodity reserves. Put all of these things on the auction block, and the first proceeds that come in should be used to buy private retirement accounts for everyone who is dependent on Social Security today or will be within 15 years. These people will have their own money, their own accounts to take care of themselves. No politician can take that money, no politician can borrow against it, no politician can use it to buy bombs to drop on Serbia or for any other political purpose. This money will belong to the seniors, and they will be finally safe and no longer vulnerable to politicians going back on their promises. And all the rest of us can be freed immediately and completely from that horrendous 15% Social Security tax. If there is a better answer to Social Security, I want to hear it, but I have not heard one as yet. Another issue that's important to us is, of course, the right to keep and bear arms. This is a right that was specifically put in the Bill of Rights, even though the 9th Amendment already covered all rights that were not taken away from the people by the Constitution. But it was specifically put in there because the politicians, the Founding Fathers, were so concerned about this right. What we have today, of course, is an outbreak of gun violence throughout America that has received a great deal of publicity. And every time there is gun violence, the Democrats say, oh, we need to have new gun laws, even if 15 gun laws were broken in the violence that just took place. And the Republicans, responding like Pavlov's dogs, immediately say, oh, no, 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 we don't need new gun laws. We need to enforce the gun laws on the books now. Ladies and gentlemen, those gun laws are the principal cause of gun violence in America today. Those gun laws have no effect upon criminals whatsoever. Do you think a criminal is going to buy a gun in a way that involves a background check? Of course not. Is he going to submit to a waiting period, or registration, or licensing, or gun locks, or trigger locks, or safety locks, or baby locks, or locks and bagel, or anything of the sort? Obviously not. He will buy his guns in the underworld, or he'll simply steal them from you. Meanwhile, we, the innocent people, when we go to buy a gun, we're subjected to all kinds of forms, gratuitous invasions of our privacy, waiting periods. If you're a woman being stalked, what do you do when you have to put up with a 3-day or a 5-day waiting period? Tell the stalker, time out? We can't do it. We can't continue this little game for 3 days? Of course not. All this does is to put innocent citizens at a disadvantage. And you know something? Who is it that they always cite as the reason for all of these laws, for all of these programs, for all of these restrictions on guns and whatever it is? Who is the object of all of this? The children, of course. So whom do they leave completely defenseless? What is the one area of society where there is not allowed to be anybody there to defend the children? Our schools. Isn't this absurd? If there had been one person at Columbine High School who had access to a gun and knew how to use it, there might be 6 or 8 children alive today who instead are buried under a pile of gun control laws. This is absolutely insane to leave that one area of our society completely defenseless. If any area were to be defended, that should be the one. And then, of course, they want to leave churches defenseless also. The fact of the matter is that these gun control laws always lead to the opposite result from what was intended or what was touted for them, not unlike government programs as a whole. We need not to pass new gun control laws. We need not to enforce the gun control laws in the books now. We need to repeal those laws once and for all. Now, the question always arises, yes, but who needs an assault weapon? Who needs a tank? Who needs a mortar? Who needs this? Who needs that? And so on, besides this gentleman in the audience here. It is not for us to decide whether a Korean store owner during the LA riots, what kind of weapon that person needed to defend his life savings that were tied up in that store, when an armed gang was there at the door ready to take everything from him and the police were nowhere to be found. It is not for us to decide. We don't need to know what other people need. It is not our business to know what other people need. You should be prosecuted for the harm you do to others. You should never be prosecuted for what you own, for what you think, for what you believe, for what you say, for what you smoke, for what you drink, for what you put in your body, but only for the harm you do to other people. Thank you. Well, you know, I probably am not going to be elected president next Tuesday. But if I were, and if I am somehow by some long shot elected president on Tuesday, I have compiled a long list of things that I want to do on the first day in office. From the second day on, I plan to spend only an hour or so in the Oval Office every day and probably watch television the rest of the time, because I do not think the president should get too busy meddling in other people's lives. But there is a great deal to do on the first day, and I'm not going to go through all of that now. In my book, The Great Libertarian Offer, I took about 3 pages describing the agenda, and even then I forgot a lot of things that I thought of later. But one of the things, the reason I bring this up, one of the things I want to do on the first day in office is to issue an executive order disarming all the guards at the Capitol building who guard the congressmen. My slogan is, gun control begins at home. And I will tell the Congress that I will rescind this order the day that they restore to every American citizen the unqualified right to defend themselves from armed criminals. And because congressmen are very slow learners, I think it may take as long as 5 or 10 minutes before they get around to it. One last point about guns and gun control and gun laws and the like. You don't have to own a gun. to profit from the right to keep and bear arms. If you just live in a neighborhood where some people own guns, then every criminal who enters that neighborhood has to wonder which house has a gun. And you will be better protected than you are in a nation or a community or a city that has gun control laws where the criminals know that every house is disarmed. So whether you're afraid of guns, whether you are concerned about guns, whether you're concerned about your children, whatever it may be, it is still important to you to make absolutely sure that there are people in your neighborhood who can protect themselves with guns and that criminals know it. Another issue that is, of course, very important to libertarians is this insane war on drugs. This is the nightmare of prohibition all over again. In the 1920s, during alcohol prohibition, we had drive-by shootings, gang warfare, police corruption, people dying of drinking bathtub gin, a substance that should be harmless when it's legal, like gin, became a lethal weapon, a deadly toxic substance when it was bought from strangers on a street corner or manufactured in one's own bathtub. Today we have all of these things again and more because the war on drugs has gone on for so long. The war on drugs sort of typifies everything about all government programs. Number one, it's unconstitutional. The federal government has no business legislating on common crimes in any way whatsoever. The founding fathers were adamant about the idea that there would never be federal police forces legislating and prosecuting common crimes like murder or robbery or any of these things. These were meant to be handled at the state and local level. The founding fathers were afraid that having federal police forces would lead to things like the Waco massacre or the kidnapping of Elian Gonzalez or the shooting at Ruby Ridge and all of the SWAT team adventures that have led to so many wrongful deaths over the years. This is something that should never be. So the drug war is unconstitutional to begin with. Secondly, it does not produce the results that the politicians promise for it. Drug use has not gone down as a result of the drug war. In fact, like other government programs, it has produced the opposite. Just as the war on poverty has elevated poverty in America, the drug war has escalated drug use in America, and it has escalated crime. The crime rate, the homicide rate were going down from the end of Prohibition in 1933 right on into the 1960s, and then they started going back up again when the drug war started. The drug war has taken law enforcement resources away from fighting violence in our society, apprehending violent criminals, and applied those resources to going after pot smokers, cocaine users, and other people who are perhaps no harm to anyone else, who may be harming themselves for all I know, but I know that they are not harming other people. And the result is that the law enforcement resources aren't there to apprehend the dangerous criminals. Further, it is a threat to our children. There was a time in this country when a little girl could walk into a drugstore and buy heroin. It seems amazing today, but before the First World War, before there were drug laws, a 10-year-old child could walk into a drugstore and buy heroin. Heroin was sold as a pain reliever and sedative in measured doses, just the way Bayer sells aspirin today. In fact, it was Bayer that was selling the heroin. But the funny thing was that little girls didn't go into the drugstore and buy heroin. For one reason, it wasn't forbidden fruit. So they didn't buy it and take it behind the barn with their friends to try it out to see what this was all about, any more than they would buy up a bunch of aspirin and take it behind the barn today. Secondly, no one was plying them with the drugs. Pharmaceutical companies had no interest in spoiling their reputation by putting these things into the hands of children, but drug gangs in the inner cities have no qualms about this at all. They are glad for any new customer, whether that customer is 5 years old or 50 years old. So they have their own representatives on school campuses trying to get kids hooked on drugs. Before there were drug laws, we had very, very few of the problems that we take for granted with drugs today. Sure, there were people who used drugs. Sure, there were people who abused drugs. Sure, there were people who were addicted to drugs. But they were localized problems, and they were far fewer problems than today. Today, drugs are everybody's problem because we can get caught in the crossfire. And because it is impossible to succeed in any prohibition, because it is impossible to gain the cooperation of the public in getting marijuana users and cocaine users into prison, because the system simply does not work, it becomes more and more oppressive. The prison sentences get longer. The law enforcement violations of the Bill of Rights become greater and greater, and we have more SWAT teams banging down doors and finding out that this was an anonymous tip from somebody who just didn't like the person's dog barking, but called the police and said, oh, they've got drugs in their house, you better check it out. The result is that now the police lie, now the police use sting operations, now the police rely on informers, now the police rely on all the trappings of a police state to try to prosecute this war on drugs. And it doesn't matter whether you use drugs yourself, whether you have any interest in drugs, none of this matters. It is your Bill of Rights and it is your life that is being affected by it. It is your bank account that they are snooping through, looking for suspicious transactions. It is your email that's being monitored. It is your car that can be stopped and torn apart. It is your property that can be searched and seized without due process of law. It is you who can be strip searched at an airport, and all in the name of the drug war, even though you have no interest in drugs whatsoever. And perhaps the worst part of it of all is the hundreds of thousands of people who have never done any violence to anyone else, never intruded on anyone's person or property, who are lounging today in prison with 10, 20, 30-year sentences without hope of parole. Some cases, life sentences. People who have never done any violence at all. And at the same time, if you commit a murder, because the system is so crowded with drug cases, you can plead it down to manslaughter and maybe get an 8-year sentence and then be out on the street in 4 years. But if you sell marijuana to your friends, if your son or daughter makes one silly mistake, that could be a 10, 20, 30-year sentence with no hope of parole whatsoever because of the mandatory minimums. We need to restore these people to society. We need to restore them to their families. We need to get them out of prison and make room for the murderers, rapists, child molesters, and other violent people who are harming society and yet who are out on the street because the prisons are so overcrowded. And more than anything else, we need to restore the literal meaning of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights so that this sort of thing can never happen in America again. If we care anything about our country, if we care anything about our cities, if we care anything about our children, we must and we will end this insane war on drugs. And I want to tell you that there is great hope of this. I believe that the drug war is living on borrowed time. Times have changed dramatically in just the last few years. 5 years ago, if I were on a radio show and I said we should legalize drugs, that is the way to solve the drug problems in America, the phones would light up. People would call in, their voices would go up 2 octaves. Oh, you're going to have heroin machines in the restrooms, and we're all going to be driving high on drugs, and so forth. And people would become hysterical about it. Today, I say the same thing, and people don't respond at all. Somebody might call in and say, well, you know, I agree with most of what you say. I'm not sure about the drug thing, but I wanted to ask you about something else. And even when somebody disagrees now, it's a very reasonable conversation. The emotion has gone out of it. Most people realize that the war on drugs is a failure. Not just a failure, but a disaster. They don't know what the solution is. They haven't connected all the dots yet, but they know that this isn't working. And it is just a matter of time till it becomes obvious what the solution is, and that is to get the federal government out of this completely. And when we do that, different states will have different laws, and we'll be able to see what the difference is between legalized drugs and illegal drugs. We will see where the gangs still congregate and where they don't. And I think we will get rid of this drug war completely in just a matter of a few years. So there is great hope on this front, and I hope that you will be not discouraged and not pessimistic about it. I believe that those people in prison will be restored to their families. And I believe that if we had a libertarian president, they would be restored very quickly. Because certainly one of the things I would do on that first day in office, from the inauguration platform, I would issue an unconditional pardon to every federal prisoner who is there on a nonviolent drug offense. Well, there are many other issues that libertarians are concerned about, but these are four of the most important ones. Repeal the income tax by making government so small we don't need it. Free you immediately and completely from this horrendous Social Security tax. Restore the right to defend yourself against armed criminals, and end this insane war on drugs. And these are just a few of the reasons. In fact, this is the short answer to the question, why I am running for president. The second question that comes up in its wake, following that first one, is, yes, but why are you running? You can't possibly expect to win. Well, that misses the point, because the point is that we will not win. We will not have a free country again. We will not be free to live our lives as we see fit. We will not get government out of our lives until we do have a libertarian president, and we'd better start right now doing whatever we have to do to make that happen, whether it's going to happen in 2000, 2004, or 2008. God is not going to appear in the heavens one day and suddenly say, this year is the year you can have a libertarian president, so now you can vote libertarian, now you can run a campaign. No, this is something we must build, this is something we must lead up to, and we are doing so. And we have every reason to be optimistic about the future. As a matter of fact, I have often been accused of being the most optimistic person in the Libertarian Party. And I must admit that a few months ago when I went in for my physical, the doctor diagnosed me as having chronic euphoria. With Pollyanna syndrome. But the fact is, we have every reason to be optimistic. We are the only people who are offering to change people's lives for the better. The Republicans and Democrats have nothing to offer. If you watch the Republican and Democratic conventions, if you watch those amazing debates, and if you did all that, I feel sorry for you, but if you did see all of this, you never saw one proposal that would change your life for the better in any significant way. What do they have to offer? All they talk about are policies and different figures, and you're wrong, no, you're wrong, oh, you said, no, I didn't say that, and on and on. They have been reduced to the simple equation, the simple campaign slogan, I guess you would call it, that I may be bad, but I'm not as bad as my opponent. When Bill Clinton gave his farewell address at the Democratic Convention, he spent 45 minutes trying to convince you that your life was better than it was 8 years ago. 45 minutes he took. He trotted out facts and figures and statistics, and he talked about diabetes research and government programs, and we spent all this money on this, and we spent it all on that, and this, that, and the other thing. My heavens, if your life were significantly better than it was 8 years ago, he wouldn't have had to say anything. You'd know that it was better. In fact, if I had been president for 4 years, I could sum it all up in 2 minutes at the most. All I'd have to say is, do you remember when you used to have to pay income tax? Do you remember when they had you locked into Social Security and they wouldn't let you out? Do you remember when the drug war was tearing up our cities with violence? I rest my case. I'm going to go home and watch television now. But you see my point. We are the only ones that are offering to dramatically change people's lives by freeing them from the income tax, by getting government out of their lives, by all of these other things that we've talked about. We have the strongest, the most powerful, the most attractive political product in the world, and they have nothing. We will succeed when we can accomplish three things. Number one, We must always present that product in terms of the change that it will make in people's lives, how it will affect them personally. Talking about philosophy or economics or morality simply makes people's eyes glaze over until they have a reason to be interested in it. We need to always to show people how their lives will change. This is what the government is doing to you now. This is how we're going to take this and change it so that your life will be better, and this is what it'll mean to you personally. If we talk to people in terms of their lives, they will get the message very quickly. But secondly, the message is not important. It's not valuable if nobody ever hears it. We need to be big enough and strong enough and well enough financed to reach every American, and we're not there yet. But it's even beyond that. We need to reach them more than once. So the third thing is we need to be big enough, strong enough, and well enough financed to reach people over and over and over again. Because the first time people hear these ideas, the natural reaction is, well, that's wonderful, but it's a fantasy. They'll never let you do that. You'll never be able to win. But when they see our advertising over and over, when they see our spokespeople on television talking about these ideas many times, when they hear other people discussing them on television, when they see people criticizing these ideas, then they'll know that these are real ideas. They're substantial. These are proposals that may come about. Maybe I should help them. Maybe I should vote for them. Maybe I should give them money. Maybe I should join the Libertarian Party. I want to see these things happen. And when we get to that point where we are reaching every American over and over and over again, we're on the road to victory, because there's nothing the Republicans and Democrats can do. Contrary to the opinion of many people, the Republicans and Democrats will not co-opt our ideas. They are not going to take our ideas and make them their own, because they don't want our ideas. Our ideas take power away from them. Yes, they'll use the rhetoric. Even Al Gore says he's the candidate of smaller government. But they can never follow through with any specific proposals to actually reduce government, because they don't want to take the power away from themselves and give it back to you. That's why George Bush can say he's the candidate of smaller government, even as he talks about a prescription drug benefit, about taking your money and distributing it to charities of his choice, about extending the federal government's control over local schools to private schools through a voucher program. Through all of these things that he's going to do to make government bigger, he still talks about smaller government, but he never follows through by making a specific proposal that would end a federal agency, get government out of your life in any specific way. We have that field all to ourselves, and we always will. Now, I know they're going to throw more roadblocks in our way, just as they have with the ballot access laws and the campaign finance limitations and the taxpayer funding of their own campaigns and the debate commission, which is a rigged process set up by the Republicans and Democrats in Congress. They'll throw more roadblocks in our way, but we can overcome these because of the power of our message. I truly believe that we could have a libertarian president and a libertarian Congress by the end of this decade. And I believe it all begins, actually not begins, but from this point forward, it begins with my getting at least 1 million votes this year. If we could get 1 million votes, we could make the press and the public pay attention, and we could give hope to those 100 million non-voters who quit voting because they knew that there was no difference between the Republicans and Democrats, so there was no point in trying to make a difference by voting. We could show them that there's a growing party that wants to get government out of their lives, that there are people who are working to set them free from the Al Gores and the George Bushes of the world. We could give hope to everybody. And if I were to finish ahead of Pat Buchanan with all of the publicity that he's gotten, with $16 million of taxpayer money, $20 million spent overall, opposed to our $2 million or so, and no taxpayer money because we wouldn't take what was offered to us. If we come in ahead of Pat Buchanan, think how this is going to play with the press, with the media, with everybody. It's going to show them that we have a message that is so powerful that we don't need the taxpayer money, that all we need is to reach more people, because a great proportion of those who heard the message did respond to it. I believe that that's possible. I don't know that it will happen. I can't predict the outcome of this election or any part of it. but I know that it is possible. And I do feel very strongly that we could have a libertarian president and a libertarian Congress by the end of the decade. And that brings me to the final question, which really isn't a question. It's, well, more a group of concerns. Concerns that I've heard, that I'm sure you've heard many times. People say, I agree with 80% of what you say, but you can't win. So I'm going to vote for somebody I don't agree with at all. Or people say, yes, I agree with most of it, but you want to go too far. Or you don't want to go far enough. Or you want to go too fast. Or you want to go too slow. Or whatever it is. Or you haven't satisfied me that some particular thing that the federal government does now could be done better if the federal government didn't do it, or doesn't need to be done at all, or whatever it is. But you know something? These are all just technicalities. They are really minor issues, and it's interesting how people don't realize it. But you can make them realize how insignificant these concerns are by asking one simple question, which is the answer, in effect, to all of these concerns. And that question is very, very straightforward. Do you want smaller government? Do you want this? Do you want an end to the welfare state? Do you want an end to the income tax? Do you want to be free of Social Security? Do you want to end this insane war on drugs? Do you want to get government out of your life? Do you want smaller government? I can almost guarantee you that 9 out of 10 people to whom you put that question will say yes. And if you run into the 10th person, be a good salesman and just say, thank you very much, and go on to the next person. But with those 9 out of the 10, stress this and ask them again, do you want smaller government? And if the answer is yes, then the next step is obvious. If you want smaller government, the first thing you must do is to stop supporting the people who are making government bigger. There is no way you can go east by traveling west. It's a physical impossibility. There is no way you can get to smaller government by encouraging and rewarding and voting for the people who are making government bigger. If you want smaller government, you have to start now to get it, by voting for smaller government. Can we win this year? Perhaps not. But you're not going to win anyway. You vote for the Republicans or the Democrats, you're not going to get smaller government. In fact, you're telling them that you want bigger government, and you're encouraging them to do even more than they promised you in the campaign. If you vote for Republicans or Democrats, you are giving up. You're saying, I'm never going to be free, so I'm just going to make the best of a bad situation and vote for the person who will take me to hell at the slowest possible rate. But the destination is the same in every case. No, you may not win this year with the Libertarians, but you have a chance to win in the future with the Libertarians. If you vote Libertarian now, if you do what you can to get the largest vote total possible for the Libertarians, you will be taking a step forward to the day when we will have a free country again. But if you vote Republican or Democrat, you're putting it all off for another 4 years. You're saying, well, maybe someday I'll get around to doing the right thing, but now I feel that I hate Al Gore so much, I've got to vote for George Bush. Or I'm so afraid of the religious right, I've got to vote for Al Gore. For heaven's sakes, raise your sights. Don't vote against somebody. Don't vote to buy time. Vote for freedom. Vote for what you want. Vote for the future. Vote Libertarian. It is the only way you will ever get to smaller government from where we are now. I can't promise anything. I can't guarantee anything. I can't even predict anything. But I do believe that that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is waiting for us. And I think that we could get there by the end of this decade. And that pot of gold is really something. It is the clean, fresh air of freedom that we could breathe in this country. It is a country in which we are sovereign and that we are no longer ruled by people from Washington making all of our decisions for us, deciding how much of our money we can keep, deciding what our retirement system would be, and how we must serve them, but rather how we can serve ourselves and our families. It is an America that is exemplified by the Statue of Liberty, that great woman standing in New York Harbor, holding up her torch for the entire world to see, beckoning to the entire world, saying, if you can just get to America, just come here and you will be a free, sovereign individual. Here, no one will ask for your papers. No one will attach a number to you. No one will extort a percentage of your income. You will be free to live the life that you've always dreamed of. Free to pursue that life. Free to try. Free to succeed. Free to fail. Free to have the opportunity to raise your family by your values, not the values of the rulers. And I think that that's the meaning behind the words that Emma Lazarus wrote that are now inscribed on the Statue of Liberty at the base. Those words that you've probably heard so many times, I know I have, and they never fail to inspire me. She had the statue saying to the world, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. That is the America we once had. That is the America we should have. The beacon of liberty, providing light and hope and inspiration to the entire world. And by God, I am determined that that is the America we will have again. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Remember to turn off your mic.